In this Shadow of the Erdtree video, we're going to be taking a look at patch 1.14, which just came out for Shadow of the Erdtree. We're going to be taking a look at some of the balancing adjustments for the game, kind of going through those, and help you guys break down like what they mean and how it affects Elden Ring. So for starters, and probably the biggest change, is that Radahn, the boss fight, the final boss of Shadow of the Erdtree. Sorry if that's a spoiler and you didn't know that by now. Radahn's boss fight has been nerfed. This has been made easier. They've changed the action pattern when battle starts, adjusted some moves, decreased damage, stamina of damage, attack range of some attacks, and improved the visibility. So this should be a much easier boss fight in general. I know there's going to be people out there that are disappointed that, you know, kind of got trial by fired by this boss, and they were hoping other players would join them in that elite company of defeating this boss that may not be able to do that now because of these changes. For others, I'm sure they're happy to hear that the boss is a little bit easier, because this is definitely one of the hardest bosses that From Software has ever created. There have been some exclusive PvP balancing changes. Backhand blades now deal less damage against players. Dual spear attacks deal less damage against players. I know those are used a ton in PvP because they're very quick and hard to dodge. The Pata weapon against players has had its damage reduced, and the spread crossbow weapon will no longer cause headshot damage motion when hitting another player. So you can't headshot with a spread crossbow anymore. So all those things have been nerfed. Additionally, scattershot throws had its damage decreased against players, and it also can't headshot against other players. I know this is one that people were really complaining about being abused in PvP. Discus roll has had the damage animation value generated by the skill decreased when hitting another player, so it should just be less effective in general across the board. And the weed cutter weapon skill, which is on one of the great katanas, has had its poise value decreased on the follow-up attack when used against players. When it comes to general balancing adjustments, I'll just go through the most important ones. The first heavy attack that a player does that's not charged for many weapon types in the game has had its attack speed increased. I assume this is because people were either just doing light attacks or charged heavy attacks. They're trying to get people to have a reason to use uncharged heavy attacks as well. Hand-to-hand weapon arts have had their damage increased, and they've shortened the recovery time between normal attack and follow-up attacks to make it even faster. Colossal sword weapon type has increased the moving distance when attacking, so it'll pull you further forward, and the first normal attack will be faster, so it should be easier to use. Small and medium shields have had an increase to their damage negation when blocking physical attacks, so their physical damage negation should be higher on some small and medium shields. And also the guard boost of some shields of these types has been increased. So they should just be better all around. Obviously, this isn't going to apply to every one of these shields, but as a whole, they should be a little bit more effective than they were previously. The Smith's Grip Dagger's throwing range has been increased for a second time, so it should go even further than it did on the previous patch that boosted this. So if you're someone who likes that weapon, it should be even more effective now. They've increased the attribute scaling for Rolana's Twin Blades for lower intelligence and faith attributes. So what I'm assuming means that they've changed the curve here so that few points invested will actually result in more damage earlier on, but will taper off sooner. So you can get more damage out of lower attributes, particularly intelligence and faith, on this weapon. If you remember in our build video talking about this weapon, I recommended spreading your stat points evenly between strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith. If you were favoring like an all-around playstyle that did, you know, weapon skill attacks and regular attacks, this should be improved even with that sort of setup now, because you'll get even more damage out of intelligence and faith with lower attribute levels than you did previously. And then Rolana's Cameo Talisman, arguably one of my favorite talismans in the game, even though it's very, very difficult to use, has had a reduce in the delay before the damage enhancement activates, so you charge it quicker, and it also deals more damage than previously. So I haven't tested this out yet, but I'm hoping this means that this will finally find its way into builds. Bosses in Shadow of the Erdtree particularly were just so aggressive, really didn't give you the time to just sit there and hold L2 for a couple seconds to charge this up to get a little bit extra damage out of it. Hopefully now you can see it in a lot more builds, and definitely want to showcase this moving forward. When it comes to weapon arts, Light and Darkness have both had their attack speed increased. I don't think these were particularly great, which is why you haven't seen a build with them on our channel, but maybe I'll look into doing that now. The Obsidian Lamina weapon has had its weapon skill buffed. It's reduced stamina consumption when using it, increased poise damage of follow-up heavy attacks, increased the movement distance of the first follow-up heavy attack, and adjusted the damage animation recovery time when the second follow-up heavy attack hits another player. So this is just better all around, particularly with follow-ups, it seems. So if you're someone who likes that weapon, that Reaper weapon, then you might want to check this out. Shield Strike was nerfed. Canceling other actions to perform this weapon art will now take longer. I think this was being abused by people to block and attack simultaneously in boss encounters, and they would just cancel the animation or whatever they were doing by using it and take no damage or very, very little damage. So this has been nerfed. Moon and Fire Stance, again, this is the weapon skill on Rolana's Twin Blades, has had increased the light wave range, poise damage, and attack speed of the stance's normal attack, increase the poise damage of the stance's heavy attack, so the magic damage attack is going to get buffed, so will the heavy attack with fire, and adjusted the damage animation recovery time when a stance's heavy attack hits another player. So this is just better all around, so if you were having difficulty using it before, it should be improved now. Devonia's Vortex weapon skill has been buffed. This is desperately needed. You'll have seen this weapon skill in our Devonia Devastator build. Really love this weapon skill. It's had its attack power increased, extended the attack range of the Great Hammer Spin, increased poise value and poise generation speed, so it should be easier to pull this weapon skill off, and some adjustment to the damage animation recovery time when using a charged attack against another player. Previously, Ordovis's Vortex was just outperforming this, so hopefully this has been improved to be on par with that, or at least slightly better considering how much heavier this weapon is. Moving along to spells, Rolana's Twin Moons has been buffed. Really happy about this. Increase the attack range for the first and second attack. That's great. Rather short. And reduce the knockback distance of the second attack so enemies aren't going to get knocked quite so far. You'll see this spell in our Carrion Knight build. I really, really like this spell. So it should just be a little bit more effective. You can use it from further away from enemies, which, even though you don't have hyper armor on this skill, should allow you to pull it off more easily without being interrupted. And then when it comes to incantations, Aspect of the Crucible Thorns was buffed. Aspect of the Crucible Bloom was buffed. I've tried making builds with these, and I never ended up putting them in just because I thought they were a little bit on the weaker side in general. Same with Divine Bird Feathers. So I'll be curious to try these out now and see if I can actually fit them into a build where it makes sense. Furious Blade of Ansbach has had canceling this animation into rolls will now take less time, so you can roll out of it easier. It does more poise damage. Does more knockback distance, so this should just be better in general. Midra's Flame of Frenzy has increased attack speed, increased frenzy status buildup range against enemies, and a decreased frenzy status buildup when using the skill. So it's just easier to use in general. This is one I was definitely looking into adding into a new frenzy build that I've been working on, and it was difficult to justify. Hopefully it will be able to fit in there now. And then finally you have Bale's Flame Lightning has had its attack power increased. If you watched our Dragon God build, this is one that we talked about in that video that I didn't include in the build after some testing, simply because it just didn't do enough damage compared to the hyper armor that it got compared to maybe some other spells. So I'm hoping that this can actually justify it and you could slot it into that build now or see it in more builds in general. There are various bug fixes here in the bug fixes section. One of them that's particularly interesting is they fixed a bug where some attacks of Bale's Tyranny Incantation did not hit multiple enemies. This is a really good fix. That's one that's desperately needed. And also a bug that caused attacks from Bale's Tyranny to go through certain terrain. So if you're somebody who's using that spell, you're definitely going to be happier with that now. Another bug that was fixed is Godfrey's Icon Talisman, which historically increases the damage of charged skills and spells, did not apply to some skill spells and incantations. So my guess is if you were using this in a build or testing this in a build before and you weren't getting the damage that you should out of it, you should probably test it now. So that wraps up our patch 1.14 video. I think generally almost all of these changes are good. There's a couple nerfs in there, but even the nerfs I think were probably warranted most of the time. So this is probably one of the best patches for Shadow of the Erdtree that I've seen yet. It just gets basically everything right. You can argue if you want about final boss balancing adjustments for Radahn, and you can make a case either way probably. So I think that's kind of a wash when it comes to a positive or negative. But just about everything else here, I think most people would agree, are good changes, and most of the things are buffs, so that's great to see. Stay tuned because we do have more Elden Ring builds coming for Shadow of the Erdtree. Probably some of these will use some of these new changes, so stay tuned for those. What do you make of the patch? Are you happy with it? Are you checking out Shadow of the Erdtree again if you haven't played in a while because of the patch? Let me know in the comments below.